A reading from John. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." So this scripture is just packed with symbolism and all kinds of things, but I want to focus on one little piece of it. You will always have the poor among you. What an extraordinary statement, right? Here's a prophet, here's someone who is the Son of God, who knows something, and he's saying, you will always have the poor among you. Now, in Jesus' time, you can see where that is a sensible statement, right? 2,000 years ago, it was really hard to feed everybody. There was this deep sense that poverty was intractable. 2,000 years later, we look around the world around us, and yeah, it feels like poverty is intractable. But here, us, right now, in the richest country in the history of the world, this seems like a remarkable statement. Yet it seems horribly true that even in the wealthiest place in the history of the world, the poor are still among us. And what I want to do today is I want to implicate us. For all the goodness, for all that we give, I want us to look at how we are part of keeping the poor with us. And as a faith community, what we might do about it. But I want to start with a video. It's a little longer than normal, but it is really quite extraordinary in terms of looking at our situation.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans, and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change. And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own, because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976 they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money, but do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Isn't that extraordinary? Let me put some numbers behind this. Nearly 1 in 6 Americans lives in poverty. 46 million people in this country live in poverty. More than 20%, 1 in 5 of the children live in poverty. And when we're talking about poverty, we mean an income of under $23,000 a year for a family of 4. So these numbers do not count the millions of people that live just above the poverty line. In the nation's wealth, in the world's richest nation in the history of the world. This is telling. That dreaded socialism thing that he put up there. If we took the wealth, now what we mean here, it's important. Wealth and income are not the same. Wealth is the value of all the stuff that we have built over 200 years, all the stocks and bonds, but the real live stuff, our houses. If we divided it and made it equal for everybody in this country, and there's a very poignant argument for doing that, each of us, each individual would have a net worth of $173,000. My family of four would have a nice little nest egg of about $750,000, and Annie would have a very different set of options going to college. This all touches all of us. At the very extreme, the 5 members of the Walton family that own Walmart have more wealth personally than the 30 million poorest Americans. Okay, so what do we do with this? You've seen this symbol. This is our symbol that says we really celebrate the full integrity of our tradition while being very expansive at the same time. I want to take one piece of that. This does not mean we intend to put a Mercedes in every garage. It does not go there. What it suggests is that there are 3 fundamental perspectives on any issue. And what I'm doing here is I want to take all 3 of those perspectives and see where we stand in that. So the 3 perspectives are I, the experience from being me in the middle of it, we, our relationships, and it's the structure, the systems that surround us. So let's start here. Let's look at the economic, social, political systems. These are the laws and the things that create our social structure. And there's a spectrum here. On the far right are libertarians. Their belief is that government is bad no matter what. Get rid of all government. At the opposite end of the spectrum is socialism, and here off the map is communism, which basically says that capitalism is destructive and the government should basically own all of the productive resources on behalf of the people. Now in between here, over towards the right, is corporate capitalism. That's the system that dominates our country here, okay? Except for extreme dictatorships where there is a rigid command economy, most of the world thinks that this is probably the worst system in the world. A system based on the markets, but dominated by corporations. Within our system, it's laws like corporate personhood that says a corporation is a person, laws like Citizens United that says that they can now spend all the money they want as a person to elect officials. The Europeans have basically said, no, we need to temper the worst of corporate capitalism and at least put government in the middle of it. So there's the spectrum of kind of the political system. Let's look at we. When I say we, what I'm pointing to is who we are as a culture. And the stories we tell ourselves collectively about what is important, what is valuable, why we're here, what we're doing. And what I want to suggest here is that the system and the argument, the explanation of who we are in this culture far outpaces anything that the religious organizations say nowadays about who we are. Off to one side, the libertarian side, and this is a spectrum, the market equals God. That is the basis of faith. Markets allocate, distribute resources and people and organize our system in a way that no God ever could. Okay? At the other extreme are socialism and communism, and it says, no, the market is Satan. And it is Satan because what the market really does is it concentrates wealth and power in the hands of a few so they can dominate the rest of us. So what I want to do here now in the next couple of minutes is to suggest to you what I call economic theology. Now, economic theology masquerades as science because science is the language of our culture that is legitimate. And if you're going to be legitimate, you must sound scientific. Now, you've heard me say this. As a recovering economist, I refer to myself very often as a priest of the ruling class because my job as an economist was to tell the story of how this is the best possible system in the world, and I will explain to you why. Okay? But what I'd like you to do here, you probably all love seeing a graph, right? This is the coolest stuff in the world, right? God, I'm coming to church to get away from this garbage, right? No. Anyway, what I want you to do is not look at these so much as a graph, but as religious symbols, because they are much closer to that than they are to science. What we're looking at here is a graph that says, looking at the labor force and workers and how much are they going to be paid. And you have this supply curve, okay? It says, how much will workers work at different salaries? The higher the wage, the more I'm willing to work. It represents my willingness, your willingness to work. The demand for laborers says, okay, how productive is each additional worker? And the extrapolation from that is, how much do you contribute to the welfare of this society? So it's a beautiful combination. How much am I willing to work and how much do I contribute? And we get this magic place. Notice if we tip this, it becomes the cross. This magic place that says, we call it equilibrium, we do not call it salvation, but it is very, very closely related, where we hire exactly the number of workers that are needed and pay them exactly what they're worth. So if you're a CEO, there's not a lot of you around. We only need a few of you, and you can basically command $1 gazillion, and that's who's hired. Okay? And this happens for every kind of worker. Now, the implication of this, the economic value of a worker depends on their willingness to work. Am I willing to work at different wages? Character, right? That's the whole thing of character. And their contribution to the social good. I don't think any of us have a problem with this. This resonates deeply in our culture, that we want to reward the people who are willing to work and have the skills and the ability and are really willing to put it out there. And because when they put it out there, we all are better. Okay? I don't have any problem with this. This is not part of the critique. The critique comes here when economic theory becomes a faith system. Every scientific or pseudoscientific theory begins with a set of assumptions. I don't care who you are, they are assumptions because we cannot prove them. So they are based on faith, they are based on a philosophical system. And here's where economic theory becomes faith. You remember those two crossed there? That's a really beautiful graph that doesn't have anything much to do with reality. It is an approximation that is pulled away and away and away. The truth is, we don't know how much you contribute to the social welfare. It is an unknowable number. So what we do is we make a leap of faith based on our theoretical understandings and our presumption that the market is God and God knows all. Therefore, whatever amount of money you make that must represent your productive contribution. Is everybody with me here on this? The theory says productive contribution and willing to work determines your wage, but since we can't really know any of those things, we're going to go backward through the whole thing and say that whatever amount of money you receive, whatever amount of wealth you receive, must be because you are so worthy. I mean, this is a rewriting of the Protestant ethic, right? Wealth is an expression of God, how much God likes you, right? Okay, is that pretty clear? That means the CEO making 380 times what the worker is making makes that because he's worth it. Not very many she's. He is worth it. How do we know he's worth it? Because that's what he gets paid. Do you know what a tautology is? It goes in circles, right? It defines itself by itself. That's exactly what it is. The market determines your worth as a person, i.e., the market is God. Now, this pervades our society. Oh, okay, here, let me go here. So, why are people poor? They are takers and they refuse to work for the wages offered. That's obvious. They actually said that. That gets said. They do not contribute to society. That's why people are poor. They haven't invested in the education, the skills that they need that society wants to be productive. It's their fault. This is really clear. Duh. The faith of the nation says it very clearly. Here it is. This is from the Archdiocese of Washington. Help people move themselves out of poverty, learn self-sufficiency, and become independent. In a quasi-religious framework, they have stated very clearly the faith of the United States. Now, why do I do this? Besides the fact that I love to go on a tirade. This is the story that pervades our culture. It is taught far more thoroughly than Christian values even have a hope to be taught. It is in all the schools and it permeates all of our airwaves. This is the story of America. As a faith community, one of the things we can do is question that. We can hold it up to the light and say, something ain't working. You've heard the phrase, speak truth to power. This is part of speaking truth to power. Essentially it says, your story of how the world works, well, that's bullshit. Now, amen. I swear from the pulpit and I get an amen. God, I like that. Alrighty, let's look at this last one, because there is more to this. What about the personal meaning we make? All of us have a deep sense of identity. We have the sense of who we are. I am this person. I'm good for these reasons. I'm bad for these reasons. I'm capable for this reason. I'm not good enough for that. Blah, blah, blah. How do I write those stories? Well, I write those stories from the cultural stories that I live in. Okay? I have a whole bunch of hidden assumptions. I have a bunch of core beliefs that have been instituted, insinuated in me since the moment I was born. They are so well ingrained, I never think twice about them. They are. Gee, I don't really know who I am. I have the sense that everybody else is better than I am, but geez, I make more money than that poor person. I must be better than them. Yes. Okay? This serves me, by the way. This serves me really well, because in my effort to find an identity that I am happy with, I am continually comparing myself to others. And if others are doing less well by the things that my culture value, then by contrast, I'm doing better. I am a better person. I made the hard decisions to invest. I deserve the money I receive. Does any of this ring true? I want to say this within the context of a community that gives generously. I am not in any way demeaning the contributions, the love and the heart that comes out of this community genuinely. What I am suggesting is that each and every one of us, if we're honest, contain these as well. I need the poor so I can look good. That's a biggie in our culture. That's the whole liberal agenda that came out of Western Europe. There but for the grace of God go I. Whew. I need the poor so I can feel righteous. Very important. I made some really bad choices and my income stinks, but at least I'm better than them. I'm not beating up on anybody. If you didn't have these kinds of beliefs in your heart, I would wonder if you grew up in America. What I am pointing at is that this is where the revolution happens. The revolution happens when we question into the assumptions that we take for granted as individuals and the assumptions that we take for granted as a culture. And if we're going to follow this guy Yeshua, who would go in and kick over the money changers, and finally they had to kill him because he was so damn much trouble, if we're going to follow in that tradition, then this is what it looks like. We step into the places we don't want to go. We step into the places that aren't comfortable, and we challenge the very stories that give us identity and the very stories that hold our culture together. And we do this with balance. We say, yes, those pieces are good, and these pieces are wrong. And in saying that these pieces are wrong, we enter into the tradition of Jesus. We start to become truer to our commitment as a faith community. I'm delighted to be among people that are good at that. And this is what we have to offer. There is a revolution emerging among faith communities in this country. It's time to look deeper, to look in different ways, and we're part of that edge. So I'm proud to be among you and delighted for the journey ahead. Many blessings.